One of the things I tried to bring out in the character is what we do. What goes on in the autopsy room, what goes on in recovering a body at a crime scene, but also what we feel and some of those feelings, some of those reactions.
Best-selling author Kathy Reichs today on Now I've Heard Everything. I'm Bill Thompson. Were you a fan of the TV series Bones? Well, that was a series based on the professional and sometimes personal experiences of a prominent forensic anthropologist named Dr. Temperance Brennan. Now, it turns out that Tempe Brennan, the character, was based on the real-life experiences of prominent forensic anthropologist Kathy Reichs. Tempe Brennan made her debut in Kathy Reichs' debut as an author in 1997, a book called Deja Dead, a thriller. And believe it or not, it was Kathy Reichs' first book. I met her when she was on an author tour to promote it and still kind of adjusting to the idea of being a best-selling author. In just a moment, our conversation.
Is time travel possible? Well, probably not. But it is possible to listen to a conversation from the 30-year archive of noted radio personality Bill Thompson. Enjoy!
So here now from 1997, best-selling author Kathy Reichs.
Your first novel.
Yes, it is.
Now, we should say first published novel or first novel?
This is my first novel.
Wow.
Yeah, I've done some scientific books, but my first leap into fiction.
Because I have talked with many authors. I've learned over the years that just being first published novel is not always, doesn't mean they don't have something else in the drawer somewhere. Yeah. A lot of people, this is quite a tribute to you. I mean, very few people get their first novel published, especially published in such a big way by a big publisher.
Yeah, I'm told this is true.
Wow.
I have had calls, how do I get published? And I have to tell them I really have no idea. I sent it in and they bought it and we published it and we sold it in 15 languages and it's in its, seventh week on the bestseller list. It just, it all happened.
Is this like a dream to you?
Yeah. Sometimes you wonder if you're going to wake up and like, did I graduate high school? Is it all?
No, you flunked geometry. You're going to have to come back.
And you have to take the test and you don't know where the room is. Right?
Well, give us a thumbnail sketch, if you would, of where the plot takes us.
Deja Dead takes place in Montreal. The main character is a forensic anthropologist, which is what I do. She goes back and forth between North Carolina and Montreal. She's in Montreal at the time working at the medical legal lab, and a decomposed body is found. And she recognizes links between that victim and other victims, and it grows into a serial murder story.
And Dr. Brennan could be the next victim.
That's it. Eventually it turns on her.
It gets very ugly.
It gets very personal. Yes.
Is this, I have to ask, I guess, to what degree is this truly fiction? Have you ever, in your line of work and in the real world, have you ever feared that something that happened to one of the people whose remains you are working on could happen to you?
That's always in the back of your mind, I think, especially when you work so frequently with the victims of violent crime, especially when you see so many women that are the victims of violent crime. You think about it, but you try to stay detached from that, and you've got a job to do. You're a scientist, and you want to do it. One of the things I tried to bring out in the character is what we do. What goes on in the autopsy room, what goes on in recovering a body at a crime scene, but also what we feel, and some of those feelings, some of those reactions, some of the anger, some of the frustration with seeing victims of violence.
But that's not to say that Temperance Brennan is Kathy Reichs, is it?
Temperance Brennan is Kathy Reichs in the sense that she's a forensic anthropologist. She has some of my personality traits, but a great deal of the character is strictly fiction. She's a recovered alcoholic. That's strictly fiction. She's going through a deteriorating marriage and a rebellious daughter. That's strictly fiction. But her feelings as she's working in the autopsy room and what she goes through in trying to figure out who somebody is and figure out what happened to them, even though it may only be bones or a decomposed body, that's real. And that's based on different cases I've worked on. The story's not based on any one case, but bits and pieces of different cases.
I think ever since I saw my first episode of Quincy, I've been fascinated, as apparently the nation has too, with how you can take a few pieces of, sadly, a few pieces of things that used to be a human being and reconstruct not only who that was, but how they got this way.
Yeah. I once saw Quincy reconstruct an entire person from a toe bone.
Yes, I remember that episode.
Yes, I was impressed.
Wait, now, can you really do that?
Not from a toe bone, I don't think. But what we do is we look at the bones, and that's the basis of everything I do. My cases come in through the pathologist, but in cases where they can't do a normal autopsy, either to figure out what happened to the person or to figure out who they are, then they call in the anthropologist. So I reconstruct. If we get a complete unknown, say a skeleton comes in, I will tell the police the age, the sex, the race, their height, and then they can go through missing persons reports because we need a name. If you're going to get dental records, if you're going to do DNA comparisons, you have to have a name. So I give them a profile and they narrow it down. And that's how the book opens, actually, is trying to identify who this decomposed torso is.
At times, if you can separate in your mind that this was once somebody's son or daughter, or that this was somebody's mother, or that this was somebody's loyal employee, and kind of remove it and make it much more scientific than personal, it must be fascinating to you.
Well, that's what I'm trying to do. You can't completely detach. And as I said, you want to keep in mind you've got a person there, and you're working on that person. You want to make sure that person's not buried as a Jane Doe. And you want to figure out what happened to them. So you try to keep in mind it's a human being, but you do have to detach. You have a job to do and you're a scientist. You can't become emotionally involved in every case you work on.
It's like a real life detective story that you live every day.
Yeah, that's true.
So it must have been, the amateur would think it must be very easy then to write a very compelling, page-turning kind of mystery because this is what you live.
It is. It's easy in the sense that I've got all my casework to draw on. I've got all the stories. It's hard writing fiction in that I want to bring enough science into it because I think people are fascinated. They want to know how that works, the DNA and the bite mark analysis and blood spatter pattern analysis. So you want to bring enough science in. You want it to be accurate, but you have to do it. You can't use jargon as you would in writing scientific articles. It has to be a little nugget. It has to be very concise, and it has to be entertaining. And that part is difficult in writing fiction.
Wow. Oh, man, the things, it did occur to me one day that it wasn't that long ago in the span of human history that, back in the days of the inimitable Sherlock Holmes, that if a body was found in a pool of blood, even if the body was perfectly intact, the face is recognizable, there was almost no way that you could figure out much about what had happened unless you were, as Sherlock Holmes was, extremely intuitive. There was no science to help you.
And I think that's the big difference with murder mysteries today. We've always had the fascination. So murder mysteries, as you say, have been around, way back, 100 years or so. But while Sherlock solved them intuitively, intellectually, today, the reading public is more interested in seeing how the science is brought into it. How we use scanning electron microscopes and DNA typing.
But obviously because Temperance knows, you can't rely just on the machinery. You can't say to the computer, who was the killer? There has to be some intuition as well.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and that's what's fun about it. And I think that's what attracts me to what I do is I'm able to bring my science, skeletal biology, to problem solving, to putting together, sometimes literally, and that's how the book opens, literally, physically putting together pieces to reconstruct a skull, but in the broader sense, putting together pieces to solve a puzzle.
After this short break, Kathy Reichs explains how experts can explain the unexplainable.
Are you enjoying this conversation so far? And would you like to get a copy of the book we're talking about?
Just tap the link in our show notes or visit our website, heardeverything.com.
When you make a purchase through our affiliate links, you're also supporting this podcast.
And we thank you for your support.
Now back to my 1997 conversation with Kathy Reichs.
It almost sounds like sometimes, when you hear at the museum and they're piecing together the dinosaur bones found in Montana or something to try to get an idea of what it looked like. But this is, when you're talking about human beings and relatives who want to know what happened, is it common to be able to put together random pieces and actually figure out and be able to say in an authoritative way, it was a hatchet blow to the neck. It was, this person must have been violently assaulted first and then shot or...
Yeah, and sometimes that's exactly what my case. Sometimes I'll know who the victim is, but the question will be what happened to them. And I'll be asked to look at blows to the head to see if it's a hatchet or bullet entrances and exits to see what the position of the victim was relative to the position of the shooter. Or sometimes, as in Deja Dead, I'm asked to look at the bones and figure out what happened to them after they're dead. The saw mark analysis, I've worked on several, or more than several. I've worked on a lot of cases over the last several years of dismemberments, post-mortem dismemberments where the body's been cut up. And what I'm asked to look at are microscopic details down in those cut marks in the bone to figure out what kind of saw or what kind of knife was used.
And there again, you can't rely just on the machinery, because if you've got somebody such as yourself or such as Temperance Brennan who has dealt with this kind of thing before, now you've got the human intuition, the human intelligence, the human memory, thinking, the ability to make connections that no computer ever could and say, I remember a case like that.
Yeah, and that's exactly what she does, is she spots things that are similar in the different victims and has a difficult time convincing the police that, in fact, they're linked and that, in fact, there is a serial killer operating.
I guess on a more legal level, are there differences between the Canadian and American systems? I mean, are there differences to what you must do or can do in your line of work?
There are differences in the legal systems. One of the biggest differences, I suppose, is that in Canada there's national criminal law code, so it's the same everywhere. And Canadians are often astounded at the idea that we have 51 different criminal codes, each state, and then, of course, federal. I will say that the character in Deja Dead takes a lot more risks than I do in my work. I do most of my work in the lab. I do go to crime scenes in two situations. One where we've had a tip that there's a body in a septic tank or a shallow burial or whatever. I will go out and help recover. The second situation would be formal exhumations, where for some reason we're bringing a coffin back up out of a cemetery. I do not go out like Tempe does, digging up bodies on my own. She takes a great many more risks than I do.
Well, you have to take some dramatic license.
That's right.
It also has occurred to me, well, it must have occurred to you, it's occurred to reviewers, there are going to be the inevitable comparisons. Temperance Brennan, Kay Scarpetta, let's see, Scribner published Patsy Cornwell one time. This is the way, I'll be honest with you, this is the way it was first pitched to me several weeks ago, was, you remember Patsy Cornwell, don't you? This must, first of all, it must warm your heart to be compared to somebody who sells the numbers of books that she sells. But
it's very flattering. I hope I can live up to the comparison.
But I'm also thinking that this really does speak to our appetite for this kind of character, this kind of setting, this kind of expertise that you can pull back the curtain and show us what really goes on back there.
Yeah, and I think one of the differences between me and Cornwell is that I actually do what it is I'm writing about. I don't have to research it. I do it on a daily basis. I also have the advantage, I teach at the FBI Academy. I don't have to be invited. I also have the advantage that we are a combined medical legal lab and crime lab, so that the parts that involve science that's not my expertise, I can walk across the hall. And everything that's in the book, she does X-ray microfluorescence analysis at one point. I will have gone across the hall, sat down with my colleague, and gone through it step by step. Or bite mark analysis. I will go through it step by step with the forensic odontologist. So I really have an advantage in that sense that, I'm actually engaged in the science I write about.
I would guess it's similar to, Tom Clancy writes very authoritatively about the military, but was never in the military himself. It's the difference between seeing how others feel when they do it and then actually feeling it yourself when you're doing it.
Yeah, I think that hopefully that comes across in the book.
And I also realize authors are not responsible in most cases for their jacket copy. But the jacket copy does describe you, immodestly enough, as a born storyteller. Do you feel...
Oh, it does?
Yeah.
I don't think I read it.
I think I'm...
Yeah.
Look at this. A born storyteller.
Well, I think my students would agree to the extent that I'm a born talker, I always tell them, please ask questions, because if you don't, I will lecture on and on and on.
But what a wonderful talent. Have you known all your life that you were maybe not a born storyteller? I mean, who knows if it's a born story, but have you always been good in keeping people engaged with telling little tales?
Actually, in university, I avoided English classes. I took the requisite, introduction to fiction, introduction to poetry, but I really preferred to be over in the science classes. So, no, I don't think I would think of myself as certainly not as a born writer or a born storyteller.
Well, but that, as the pundit once said, dead men do tell tales.
my colleague published a book of that title, Dead Men Do Tell Tales. And that's one of the things that sort of inspired me to write Deja Dead, is Bill Maples wrote a nonfiction book.
That's right.
Yes.
I remember that book.
Yeah. And that had quite a bit of success. And I was talking to Bill at an American Academy of Forensic Sciences meeting. And he encouraged me to try it in fiction, and I did. Unfortunately, Bill died this year, but
oh, you're kidding!
Yeah,
it
was quite a loss to the profession. Yeah.
Oh, I interviewed him. He was a wonderful man.
Yeah.
Oh, and the topic is so fascinating. There's no end. You must have, I'm guessing, 1,000 ideas in a drawer ready to. If you had time, you could probably write full time.
Yeah. Yeah, well, yeah. I am on leave from the university. I teach at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, and they have graciously given me leave. I'm working on the second book. I'm in chapter 8 of the second book. So
Tempe comes back, I assume.
Tempe comes back.
Excellent.
The second book will take place partly in Montreal, but partly in the Carolinas. So we're bringing her down home.
Kathy Reichs will be 77 in a couple of weeks. She's now written 24 Tempe Brennan books. The latest will be out next November. Now, you can get your copy of Deja Dead, her very first book, by tapping the link in our show notes, by clicking the link in the description below if you're watching this on YouTube, or by going to our website, heardeverything.com. We may earn an Amazon commission if you make a purchase. Heardeverything.com is where you can also find my 1991 interview with Patricia Cornwell.
All of my plots are rooted usually in the commonplace and randomness. And that, of course, is what's so frightening, because we'd rather think it's a Dean Koontz or Stephen King type monster out there who's very clever and supernatural. Somehow that would make us feel a little more immune if we knew it wasn't as commonplace as the person who pumps gas for you.
And my 1997 conversation with the creator of another very popular character, Lincoln Rhyme, author Jeffrey Deaver.
I wanted to create a whole person who was yet not whole, who had this terrible affliction that had so altered his life, and yet he still has the depth that anyone else has.
And of course, we post new episodes of Now I've Heard Everything every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and you can find us wherever you find podcasts. And thank you so much for listening. Next time on Now I've Heard Everything, as we approach the anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg, we'll revisit my 2010 conversation with radio talk show host and author Mark Levin.
The Union soldiers were watching them and were stunned by their bravery. The fact that they were charging on an open field against an array of cannons, and they couldn't believe it.
That's next time on Now I've Heard Everything. I'm Bill Thompson.